Nest going up, so it looks like we're going to see a pretty quick hive. Queen's Nest going up at about 9 minutes into the game. And it's a 3-base hive. So here's Much's first breakout attempt. He's going to get a couple of these lurkers with pretty minimal losses, but the Zergling lurker combination is holding Much in and keeping him taking quite a few lurker shots. So he's starting to take some losses, but it does look like he's going to be able to break out of this initial contain and begin to set up his third base again. And it looks like the probe is on the way to do that now. In the meantime, however, keep amassing more lurker laying and switching to hive as well, but I'm finding this a little bit curious. Normally when I see this build being executed, it's much more of a switch to it's much more mass hydras first and then a switch into lurkers rather than the immediate lurkers, so I'm pretty interested to see how this one goes. Observer getting scourged there, and that's going to give Hyvaa a lot more flexibility with his attacks. And this small force of Much's, if it was being built up for sort of a rush attack on any of Hyvaa's bases, it's certainly not what it's been used for so far. So committing to a Speedlot Archon rush build and not being able to execute that rush and shut down the Zerg third leads me to think that Hyvaa's at a slight advantage right now, but Much is setting up a third base, and it doesn't appear to me on the minimap that Hyvaa has got his own fourth going up, although that sort of inside, lower central expansion, there's something there over by a bunch of mineral patches. That might be a hatchery going up. So economically, the two are going to be roughly even once Much's third base is up and running and once Hyvaa's fourth is. But Hyvaa's managed to delay that third for quite a while. And that's about 7 lurkers heading up toward, well, it looks like toward the area in between Much's second and third, and it doesn't look like Hyvaa's been extremely effective with this. Much is still now contained at 3 bases, but that's not nearly as effective as containing a Protoss at 2. And Much now has Templars with Storm and a number of cannons going up at this third. It looks like he'll be able to defend in some degree. However, he's got, it seems to me, a limited number of forces blocking the ramp into his natural. And the Defiler Mountain is already out, and this is going to be pretty critical. It's going to be really interesting to see what Hyvaa is going to be able to do with his force and his Overlord heading into Much's main, where there are now additional gateways and some DTs on the way out. So we might see some further Corsair DT harassment now that Much has built up a fleet of about 6 or 7 Corsairs. Dark Templar are starting to clear that front door. And while Hyvaa is containing, he's not really putting enough pressure on Much. And that suicidal scouting Overlord has probably gained some information and has probably noticed that this this end of the base isn't really defended, and so a drop in the back might be coming later. And that could do some pretty significant damage. Meanwhile, Much's DTs have found an Overlordless expansion and are going to, looks like, go for a hatchery snipe rather than picking off very many drones. So, let's see, Corsairs are on standby to pick off the Overlord as it comes in, but it looks like there's enough on the ground there to drive the DTs off before they get that hatchery. I don't think that going for the hatchery snipe was a bad decision there. First Defiler's now out with a bunch of Lings. I guess it was going to go for a crackling Dark Swarm raid and try to snipe a Nexus there. Some poor timing for those DTs showing up at the base just as 3 Overlords hatch. But looks like they're on their way into the main. There is an Overlord there, but there's nothing on the ground, and so looks like a bunch of drones going to get eliminated here. The overlords are forced to flee from this fleet of corsairs. So, at the moment, Much is doing some economic damage, but I'm a little bit hard-pressed to put him in an advantage unless he is able to break out of this contain. He's macroed up a pretty solid army, but hasn't done all that much with it, and it looks like he's setting up for a 4th base of his own, while Hyvaa is going over to the bottom left to get a 5th, so this is going to be, I think, a pretty intense endgame battle, because for the most part, aside from this contain, there hasn't been much aggression to hurt Much's economy, so Much is just macroing up a large army. On the other hand, Much has done some harassment, but he hasn't shut down any expansions or even really killed all that many drones. He got maybe 8 or 9 drones with this DT harass, and you know, that's still pretty substantial, but it hasn't swung the game yet by any stretch, and I would say the game is still fairly even at the moment. Stormdrop now catching a few more drones, so I'd say Much has got the slightly stronger economy, but if he doesn't push out with his army, then there's not going to be any need for Hyvaa to do anything other than continue building drones. Nice storm on the ramp to minimize that Zergling attack. That could have really been problematic for Much if that expansion had been forced to cancel. 5 base Zerg to 3 base Protoss could have been really problematic, so that was a key maneuver. And Shuttle getting sniped in the corner of the map. I guess Much was banking on that not getting spotted. Now it looks like there's some Hydralisks alongside the Lurkers, and it's not surprising considering the Corsair harassment that we were seeing earlier, but I can't help but wonder whether Hyvaa would have been better served massing Hydralisks earlier rather than going for that Lurker contain that initially got broken out of and seemed a little premature. Much has now got a nice mix of tech. He's got Zealot. He's got every single gateway unit you can possibly produce in this group, as well as an observer. But a massive plague on a bunch of his units, and some of Hyvaa's own Scourge. But that plague is going to push Much back for now, and it's going to weaken this army substantially. So nice bit of Defiler play to save that base from some trouble, and now the robotics support bay is coming up. So we're going to get into seeing some pretty intensive endgame army construction here. Much is now going for 2 robotics facilities, so he's going to be pumping out defensive Reavers for his expansions to protect against those dark swarm raids I was talking about earlier, but aside from that, he'll be able to use these Reavers on the offense pretty effectively too, especially if we're going to be seeing a lot of defensive Dark Swarms, as well as fragile units like Zerglings and Hydralisks on the ground. The 125 upgraded splash damage that Reavers do will really tear a strip off of those units. Decent storm on the Lurkers near the ramp, but still Dark Swarm on the ramp and near the gateways. That first Reaver pops, and it looks like the cannons and that Reaver placement is going to save this expansion from suffering too much damage, but the front door defenses have been weakened, and more Zerglings are already streaming in toward that expansion, so Much is going to be a little bit hard-pressed defending his holdings, but at the moment it looks like these players are pretty content to split the map and probe each other's defenses for now. There hasn't been any commitment to a really big attack, and it's going to come down to endgame large army control, which should be really interesting to watch. I would suppose that with this many bases and the 2 robotics facilities, that Much is going to be building up for that nearly invincible endgame Archon Reaver army. And for an example of that, there was a game played between Free and Jaedong that is, if I'm not mistaken, on the Vile Attack YouTube account, and that is definitely worth seeing that endgame army in action. This is a pretty old game by now, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling it. Jaedong